Hello, and welcome to Learning Target 3.4. Congratulations that you've made it this far. We are looking at the inside of the cell in this unit, organisms and patterns in life. We're looking specifically here at photosynthesis in this Learning Target 3.4. And you have a couple of learning targets associated with this learning target overall. Is one that you should be able to identify where photosynthesis takes place in a plant cell. You should already know this based on Learning Target 3.1 about cell organelles. It happens in the chloroplast. You should be able to explain what reactants and products are of the photosynthetic process and be able to identify how gases are exchanged between the outside environment and the internal plant environment. Up here in the corners is a general overview of the photosynthetic process that we're going to be getting into in this learning target. Let's get going. So just as a quick review, going way back into one of our first learning targets of the year, is that you should know that the sun is the main source of energy for life on Earth. So giving you some context here, without the sun, none of the processes, including photosynthesis, would take place. There'd be no energy for all these different organisms that you see here in this food chain to actually get their energy and do the things that they do. So the sun gives its energy to the producer, which gives its energy to the herbivore, which gives energy to the omnivore, it gives energy to the carnivore, which gives energy to the carnivore. And when those things die, they give their energy to the decomposer, which then recycle those nutrients back into the producer so we can start this process over again. That's just a review of something we've learned in the past, but I wanted to give you this here because I wanted to connect you to what we're learning about in this particular learning target about photosynthesis. Another connection you can make is remember these vocab words, autotroph and producers. Without autotrophs and producers, photosynthesis wouldn't happen. An autotroph producer is something that can make its own food. How does it make its own food? By photosynthesis. Sunlight hits the leaves on these autotrophs or producers, and with other substances, they're able to make energy or sugar or food for this organism, for plants, basically. They make their own food. Heterotrophs, remember, consumers cannot make their own food. They need to consume other organisms. So where does this happen? It happens inside of a plant cell. And you should be able to identify that this is a plant cell for a couple of reasons. Well, one, it has a cell wall, which is different from an animal cell. And two, it has these things called chloroplasts, which make the plant green, where photosynthesis actually happens. And three, it has a really large vacuole. And also four, the shape. It looks like a brick. Here are what some actual plant cells look like. You've already looked at them in the past learning targets, including the onion cell. And we're going to be focusing on what happens inside of this chloroplast. You definitely need to know that photosynthesis takes place inside of the chloroplast. And this is how it happens, right? So essentially what's going on here is inside a leaf you have a bunch of cells, and inside these cells are the chloroplasts. And when the sun hits these chloroplast organelles, in addition of water and carbon dioxide, inside of the chloroplast, and we are able to make sugar and release oxygen. That's the basic photosynthetic process. You're going to need to know what exactly goes in and what comes out of the chloroplast in order to successfully pass this learning target. So here's another diagram up here that you can focus on to help you. Here's the photosynthetic equation. It's kind of like a chemical equation or a formula that you might see in math. But essentially what you need to know is that there's two different types of things that are happening in photosynthesis. You have your reactants, or the things that go into photosynthesis, that go into the chloroplast. You have your products, the things that come out of it. So essentially what you need to know that goes into photosynthesis, that's actually going into the chloroplast, are these two reactants, carbon dioxide, which is a gas, and water. So these are the two things that plants need to do photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water. And then inside of the chloroplast, in the presence of light, the chloroplast gets really excited. The substance inside the chloroplast is this thing called chlorophyll. So all these things need to be present inside of a plant cell in order for photosynthesis to take place. So the chloroplasts get excited, the chlorophyll gets excited when carbon dioxide, water, and light all get together. And when this happens, the molecules inside the chloroplast get broken apart and rearranged into glucose, which is a type of sugar. You studied that in the last learning target. You added that to your model cell. And oxygen. These are known as the products, or the things that are produced by chloroplast. These are the substances that react. Inside here, these things are needed, and these are the things that are essentially made. Here's another way of looking at the photosynthetic equation. Carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light create glucose and oxygen. You may need to know what these different things are, these chemical equations are. So you may be able to see it this way. right, the words, or you may need to see it as their actual molecular formula. So let's check yourself real quick. You should be able to tell me what carbon dioxide's formula is, water's formula is, oxygen's formula, as well as what are the reactions and products of the photosynthetic reaction. So take a moment, pause the video. If you need to go back in the slides, you can do that. Otherwise, you should be able to tell me that carbon dioxide is CO2, water is H2O, oxygen is O2, and the reactants are carbon dioxide and H2O, or carbon dioxide and water, and the products are glucose, sugar, and sorry, I got a cutoff here, oxygen. So glucose, sugar is a type of energy, and oxygen is the stuff that we need when we breathe in to do what we do in our bodies. We'll talk about that in the next learning target when we get to something called cellular respiration. Exciting, right? All right, so how do these things get into the plant, right? I told you that a plant needs carbon dioxide and water, and it gets rid of oxygen and glucose. Well, how do these gases get exchanged? We know that water is in the ground, and plants, you probably also know, they take up these substances through their roots, and it travels up through the trunk of the tree and into its leaves. So the water is probably already present there, gets the leaves. But what about the gases? How do those get exchanged? Well, believe it or not, plants actually breathe. And they don't necessarily breathe like us with lungs, but they breathe in and out through these different pores that we're going to talk about in a moment. So these are the pores, right? They're called stomata or stomates. You can kind of see them here. They're located on the underside of the leaf. So if you were to take a leaf, on the bottom of the leaf, and you find these little pores, these little stomata, these stomates, and that's where the gases get exchanged. So stomates are these pores or holes found in the bottom of a plant's leaves, and are used for gas exchange. And the pores are actually bordered by these things called guard cells. You see them here. Now, kind of like our mouth has lips, it's a certain way that we can breathe in and we can breathe out. Well, guard cells regulate the opening and closing of the stomate, which is essentially the region or the place where the gas is exchanged. Carbon dioxide, remember, comes into the plant, and oxygen is released outside of the stomates. And these guard cells regulate the rate at which those gases are exchanged. And the stomates also have one more unique function, and that is to help regulate the amount of water that is lost. Because believe it or not, any time that the guard cells are open, or the stomates are open, water can be lost through the plant. We know that water is essential to a plant being happy and healthy. And if a plant loses too much water, it's actually going to be out of homeostasis, which is a word that just means balance. It's not going to be dynamic equilibrium. And essentially what's going to happen is it's going to start to wilt. And when a plant kind of tilts over to its side, that's what we mean by wilt. So what you need to know essentially about stomates is that's where the gas is exchanged. The gases that get exchanged are carbon dioxide comes in, and the oxygen that's produced during photosynthesis comes out. Now, I know this is a pretty complicated process, but once you go through this a few times and you break it down for yourself, I know you're going to be able to understand things that are coming into the plant cell and leaving the plant cell during this process of photosynthesis. It's essential, absolutely essential, that you know what comes in and what comes out. And you also need to know that what comes in and out of these things is called stomates, that are guarded by guard cells that regulate the opening and also help to regulate the amount of water that goes through and comes out of a plant. Because carbon dioxide enters and oxygen leaves when it's produced by photosynthesis, this process called transpiration, which you don't need to necessarily need to know the name of it, you just need to know that water is lost through these pores, these stomates, when they are open. And that's why the guard cells are used to regulate the homeostasis within a plant cell. Don't worry so much about that right now. Just know that carbon dioxide comes in, and water and oxygen are lost through the stomates, which are on the bottom of the leaf. So there you go. That's photosynthesis in a nutshell. Just to give you one more time, sunlight comes and it hits these leaves. The leaves of a plant are an autotrophic producer. Inside of a plant cell are these things called chloroplasts. Inside the chloroplast is a substance called chlorophyll. It gets excited when sunlight hits it. As long as there's water and carbon dioxide present inside of this chloroplast, then we're going to have photosynthesis taking place. And as a result of photosynthesis, oxygen is going to be produced and released back out through the stomate, as well as sugar, the glucose. And that's the stuff that's really important for the plant, because that's a plant's food. A plant eats glucose. A plant eats sugar. And it uses it for another process which we're going to learn about in the next learning target. But for now, just be concerned about learning what photosynthesis is, what are the things that come in, where does it take place, and what are these stomates and how do they regulate photosynthetic processes. That is photosynthesis. Thank you for listening.